idea that when I walked through the door that afternoon, my life was about to change forever. It was supposed to be a normal day. My wife, who I thought I knew, would be cooking in the kitchen, and my daughter would be somewhere nearby, immersed in her schoolwork or playing with her toys. But when I stepped inside, something was wrong. There was an eerie silence in the air. I found my daughter sitting on the couch, tears streaming down her face. My heart dropped as I rushed over to her. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice full of concern. She looked up at me with wide eyes and sniffled. "All my classmates are sharing a video and laughing at me," she replied. I felt my stomach twist. "What video?" I asked, my voice barely audible as panic started to creep in. Without a word, she handed me her phone. I could barely focus as I looked at the screen. I froze. It was a video of my wife, the woman I loved, my partner of over a decade, in intimate situations with another man. And it wasn't just any video. It was filmed in our bedroom, in the place that should have been sacred and private to our family. My heart pounded in my chest, and everything around me seemed to blur. The world had turned upside down in a matter of seconds. I dropped to my knees, unable to process what I was seeing. The horror was overwhelming. My wife had betrayed me in the most public way possible, and now our daughter had been exposed to it. "I don't want Mom anymore," my daughter said between sobs. "I'm showing this to Dad, and he'll throw you out." Her words cut through me. Not only had my wife shattered my trust, but she had dragged our daughter into this mess, exposing her to something no child should ever have to witness. I felt paralyzed, unsure of what to do next. The shock was almost too much to bear. How long had this been going on? And why hadn't I noticed? I couldn't understand how the woman I had trusted with my life could do something so callous. But there it was. Our entire world turned into a nightmare. After the initial shock wore off, my mind began racing. I couldn't stop thinking about how my wife had hidden this double life from me for so long. What had been happening right under my nose? She had been so secretive lately, always on her phone, late nights out of the house, and a constant need for privacy that I had never questioned. But now, looking back, the signs were all there. I started digging through her phone, the one she had always guarded so carefully. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but I had to understand what had been going on. I found a series of videos, not just one. There were multiple clips, all featuring my wife in various explicit scenarios with different men. These weren't just random moments of infidelity. This was planned. She had been filming these encounters to sell them online. I felt sick. My wife, the woman I had married, had turned our most private moments into a business, using our intimacy to profit from strangers on the internet. She was uploading videos to adult websites, making money off the very thing I had trusted her with. I tried to make sense of it, but there was no explanation that would ever justify what she had done. The more I found, the more I realized that she wasn't just having affairs. This was a calculated, deliberate attempt to gain attention, validation, and money. It wasn't just about her looking for excitement or having a moment of weakness. It was about using me, using our life together, as a means to an end. How had I been so blind? I thought I knew her. How could I have missed this? My trust in her had been so complete, but now all I could feel was betrayal. Every memory, every intimate moment we had shared was now tainted by the realization that it had been exploited for financial gain. She hadn't just broken my heart, she had violated the very foundation of our marriage and our family. Once the initial storm of shock had passed, I knew I had to face my wife. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I needed answers, and I wasn't sure I could continue living with her under the same roof. There was too much anger, too much betrayal. But before I could make any decisions, I needed to hear from her directly. I needed to know why. I asked her to meet me that night. She agreed, and we met at the house after our daughter had gone to bed. The tension between us was palpable. When she walked in, her face didn't show the guilt or remorse I had expected. Instead, she looked distant, almost as though she was prepared for this confrontation. I didn't waste any time. I showed her the video. Her eyes widened in shock, but it wasn't the panic I had hoped for. There was no pleading, no apology. There was just a long, uncomfortable silence before she spoke. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, almost defensively. "I was just trying to feel alive again, to feel wanted." Her words hit me like a slap. "Wanted?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You used our marriage, our family, for what? To feel wanted? To make money? You've humiliated me. You've hurt our daughter. How can you say you were just trying to feel alive?" She sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I never meant for it to end like this. It was just one mistake that spiraled out of control." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "A mistake?" I echoed. "This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice you made over and over again. You destroyed our family, and now you're telling me it was a mistake?" She seemed to shrink under my gaze, but instead of apologizing, she started to justify herself. "I needed attention. I was lonely. I never meant to hurt you or anyone, but I couldn't stop." At that moment, I realized there was nothing she could say that would make me trust her again. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry it had all come to light. I had given everything to her, and she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I didn't know where we went from here, but I knew one thing for sure. Our marriage was over. As the days passed, the weight of my wife's actions continued to haunt me. But the most unbearable consequence of all was seeing how deeply it had affected our daughter. She had been exposed to something so private, something no child should ever have to witness. The video was not just an intimate betrayal, it was a public humiliation that had seeped into every part of our lives. I could no longer pretend that everything was normal. It didn't take long for the school to become a battleground. Our daughter, once a bright and cheerful girl, was now withdrawn and quiet. She didn't want to go to school anymore, and when she did, she was met with whispers behind her back, cruel jokes, and stares from her classmates. How could she face them? How could she show her face in a place where the one thing that should have remained sacred had been shared for everyone to see? Her friends were laughing, pointing, and making jokes at her expense. I could feel her slipping away from me, the pain in her eyes growing every day. One night, after another rough day at school, she came to me, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I don't want Mom anymore," she said, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking the words aloud would make everything too real. "I don't want to go to school anymore. They're laughing at me because of the video. Everyone's talking about it. They all saw it." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. As much as I had been struggling with the betrayal of my wife, my daughter was the one who was suffering the most. The shock, the humiliation, the embarrassment, it was all too much for a child to handle. How could I protect her from the cruelty of the world when the person she should have been able to turn to for love and comfort had shattered her world? I pulled her close, holding her as tightly as I could. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I will do everything I can to make this right. This is not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." But even as I said those words, I knew that nothing could undo the damage. My daughter's innocence had been ripped away. She had seen things no child should ever have to see, and her trust in the world, in people, was starting to erode. My wife's actions weren't just a betrayal of me. They had become a betrayal of our family's very sense of safety and trust. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with the school, and attempts to shield her from the constant reminder of what had happened. I pulled her from school temporarily, allowing her time to heal. But healing wasn't something that happened quickly. She had already been scarred, and as much as I tried to reassure her that it wasn't her fault, the damage was done. I realized I needed to be there for her more than ever. It wasn't just about dealing with the fallout from my wife's actions. It was about being the rock my daughter needed. I enrolled us both in therapy, hoping that talking things out with a professional could help us start to heal. I wanted her to understand that she wasn't defined by what had happened, and that there was a future beyond the pain. But despite my efforts, I could see the damage my wife had caused in my daughter's eyes. She didn't want to see her mother. She didn't want to hear from her. My wife, the person who should have been the one to protect her and nurture her, was now the source of her greatest hurt. I didn't know how to fix that. I didn't know if our family could ever be whole again. I tried to be patient, to reassure her, but I knew that the trust we had once shared, our family's foundation, had been shattered. I could only hope that with time, she would find her way back to a place of peace. And in the process, I knew I needed to find my own healing as well. But that would take time. For now, all I could do was be there for my daughter, to be the father she needed, the one who would never betray her trust. As if the private betrayal wasn't painful enough, the public humiliation quickly became unbearable. The video of my wife was no longer just something I had to grapple with in the privacy of our home. It had gone viral. It spread across social media, shared by classmates, neighbors, and coworkers. I began receiving messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, asking if I was okay. "I'm so sorry to hear about your wife," one message read. "I saw the video. It's everywhere." The embarrassment was overwhelming. I had been betrayed in the most intimate way, but the world was now watching as well. What made matters worse was the fact that my daughter was dealing with the same humiliation. Her classmates had seen the video and were now making cruel jokes at her expense. It didn't matter that she had no involvement in the situation. She was being dragged into the mess her mother had made. I had to keep my daughter away from school for a few days to let the chaos die down, but I knew that wasn't a permanent solution. This would follow her for a long time. I tried to focus on the immediate issue at hand, dealing with the fallout at home, but the public nature of it all made it feel like I was drowning. Every time I left the house, I was greeted with whispers and sympathetic looks. I wasn't just the man whose wife had cheated on him. I was the man whose wife had made money off her infidelity. The shame felt suffocating. People who barely knew me were now forming opinions about my marriage, my life, and my worth. Friends began to distance themselves, unsure of how to handle the situation. Even family members offered their sympathy, but also their judgment. It was as if my wife's actions had somehow reflected poorly on me, and I was now seen as weak for not having seen it coming. In the midst of this chaos, my wife remained calm and detached. She was unbothered by the public scrutiny, almost as if she had planned for this exposure. Meanwhile, I was left to deal with the emotional wreckage. The more time passed, the more I realized this wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a complete disintegration of everything I had built. I couldn't stay silent for much longer. My world had crumbled, and I felt an overwhelming need for justice. It wasn't just about my wife's betrayal anymore. It was about holding her accountable for what she had done to our family. The fact that she had sold explicit videos of herself to strangers while hiding it from me was the ultimate violation. I called a lawyer, hoping for some kind of legal recourse. My wife had exposed our private life to the world, and I wondered if I could sue the site that had hosted her videos. But I quickly realized how complicated the situation was. The video was out there, on a platform that didn't seem to care about the legal ramifications. Even if I found a way to remove it, the damage was already done. My thoughts shifted to revenge. The anger inside me built up, and I wanted to make her feel what I was feeling. Part of me wanted to expose her to the world, show everyone just how far she had fallen. I imagined confronting her publicly, in front of all our friends and family, forcing her to own up to the pain she had caused. But even as I thought about it, I knew that would only bring more pain, more humiliation. It would destroy what little was left of our family. What I ultimately decided on was a more private course of action. I focused on protecting my daughter, ensuring she didn't have to face any more ridicule. I started documenting everything: the video, the messages from classmates, the emotional damage my daughter had suffered. If anything came up in the future, I wanted a record of how far this betrayal had gone. I also sought therapy. It wasn't just about getting revenge on my wife anymore. It was about finding a way to live with what had happened. The anger was consuming me, but I knew it wouldn't help me heal. I had to find a way to move forward, for my sake and for my daughter's. The more I thought about everything, the more I realized that the marriage I had built was beyond repair. My wife had betrayed me in the most extreme way, but what hurt even more was the fact that she showed no remorse. She didn't seem to care about the consequences of her actions. While I was drowning in guilt, shame, and heartbreak, she was detached, almost indifferent. She apologized, sure, but it felt hollow. Her actions had proven that she no longer valued our marriage or our family. When I confronted her about the video, her response was minimal. "It was a mistake," she said. "I didn't think it would get out of hand." But that wasn't the truth. She had planned it all. She had been living a life behind my back, and now I was seeing the full extent of her deception. I suggested counseling, hoping there was some way to salvage what was left of our relationship, but she refused. "I don't think this is worth saving," she admitted. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She didn't want to fix what we had. She was done. It was clear to me now. She wasn't the person I had married. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had loved, was gone. And in her place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who valued money, attention, and instant gratification over loyalty and love. I couldn't force her to care about our marriage, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had to face the reality that our relationship had come to an end. We agreed to separate. She moved out of the house, and I took on the full responsibility of raising our daughter. The breakdown of my marriage wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the complete loss of trust, respect, and love. It felt like everything I had worked for, our family, our home, our life together, was gone. The public fallout was one thing, but the personal shame I felt was far more difficult to grapple with. I couldn't escape the sense of failure that hung over me. How had I not seen the signs? How had I been so blind to what my wife was doing? I blamed myself for not noticing the cracks in our relationship sooner. I questioned my worth, my ability to protect my family, and my own strength as a man. The emotional toll was severe. I was angry at her, angry at myself, and angry at the situation I had found myself in. But there was no easy way to process this. I couldn't just move on, couldn't just erase the pain. It was constant. Every day felt like a battle to regain some semblance of control over my life. I began seeing a therapist to work through my feelings. At first, it was hard to talk about what had happened. How could I explain that my wife, the woman I trusted with everything, had humiliated me and our family in such a public way? But therapy helped. Slowly, I started to understand that I wasn't to blame for her actions. Her betrayal wasn't a reflection of me or my worth. It was a reflection of her choices, her selfishness. The shame was still there, but I began to understand that I had to let it go. The more I talked about my feelings, the more I realized that I didn't need to carry this burden alone. I had a daughter to protect, and I had to heal for her sake. Slowly but surely, I began to reclaim my confidence. I wasn't a failure. I was a father, and I could rebuild my life. After everything had come crashing down, I still wasn't at peace. The emotional damage my wife had caused to our family was beyond repair, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I kept wondering, why? Why did she do this? Why did she tear our family apart for attention and money? We had been together for so long, raised a child together. I needed answers, even if they wouldn't heal the wounds she'd inflicted. I arranged a final confrontation. I knew it would be difficult, but I couldn't just let her walk away without facing the consequences of her actions. I asked her to meet me at a quiet cafe, the kind of place where we used to talk for hours before life got in the way. She agreed reluctantly. When I saw her walk through the door, something inside me snapped. She looked different, almost too calm, as if she'd already moved on. I wanted to scream, to demand that she feel the same pain I was feeling, but I knew that wouldn't help either of us. Instead, I calmly asked, "Why did you do it?" She sat across from me, shifting uncomfortably. "I was unhappy," she said. "I thought this would make me feel alive again. I didn't expect it to go so far. But once it did, it felt like I couldn't stop. Her voice was detached, as if she was talking about someone else's life. The words hurt, but the lack of remorse cut deeper. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done to me or our daughter. She was only sorry that it had blown up in her face. She talked about how she'd been seeking validation online, how she'd wanted to feel desired again. But what about our marriage? What about the family we'd built? I wanted to remind her of all the love and time we'd shared, but it was clear she wasn't interested. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said, my voice breaking. "You destroyed our family, humiliated me and our daughter. For what? A few moments of attention?" Her response was a shrug. "I don't know what you expect from me," she said. "I'm sorry for hurting you, but I can't undo what I've done." In that moment, I realized that I was wasting my time. She wasn't going to change. I didn't need closure from her. I needed to focus on healing and moving forward. I left the cafe that day, not with a sense of finality, but with the understanding that I was never going to get the answers I wanted. I had to let go of the past if I ever hoped to rebuild my life. The days following the final confrontation were some of the hardest I'd faced in my life. I was still processing everything: my wife's betrayal, the fallout with my daughter, the public shaming. But slowly, things began to shift. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but with each passing day, I felt myself moving further away from the devastation. I focused on my daughter. She was my priority now. I spent more time with her, taking her out for walks, talking to her about the pain we were both feeling, and assuring her that it wasn't her fault. She needed reassurance, but I needed it too. We were both healing, step by step, and I had to remain strong for her sake. It became clear that her anger toward her mother was something I had to help her work through. I found a family therapist to help us navigate this new reality. Together, we learned how to communicate better, how to cope with the feelings of betrayal and hurt, and how to begin the slow process of rebuilding trust in the world around us. I also started focusing more on myself. I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my wife's actions. I went back to the things I loved: writing, exercising, and spending time with friends. Slowly, I started finding joy in these small moments again. I joined a support group for people going through similar situations, and hearing their stories helped me realize that I wasn't alone. There were others who had experienced the same kind of betrayal, and they had found ways to rebuild their lives. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about creating a new future. It took time, but eventually I started to feel like myself again. I wasn't the man who had been humiliated by his wife's actions. I was a father, a survivor, and someone capable of moving forward. My daughter and I formed a new bond, one forged through shared pain, but also through resilience. I was no longer defined by my wife's betrayal. I was defined by my ability to heal, to protect my daughter, and to create a life that was full of love and hope. In the end, I realized that while my marriage had ended, it wasn't the end of my story. Life had a way of moving forward, and so did I. It was time for a new beginning. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so and press the notification bell. This way, you'll stay updated with more shocking real-life stories.